Dobro večer. U današnjoj Trikulturi gledat ćete razgovor s njujorškim umjetnikom, dizajnerom i arhitektom Vitom Acconcijem. Razgovor je snimljen tijekom njegovog gostovanja u Zagrebu u sklopu međunarodne skupne izložbe pod nazivom Borrow Rob i popratne konferencije Doubling Space. Obje su održane u prostoru Hrvatskog društva likovnih umjetnika. Vito Acconci široj je publici uglavnom poznat kao vizualni umjetnik, koji je karijeru započeo krajem 60-ih godina s takozvanom konkretnom poezijom. Nastavio je kroz performanse, body art i video radove u kojima se nerijetko konfrontira s publikom ili sa samim sobom. A zatim i instalacije koje su od posjetitelja zahtijevale ili sugerirale neki oblik sudjelovanja. Toga je krajem 80-ih i dovelo do odluke da osnuje vlastiti arhitektonski i dizajnerski studio, te da se odrekne statusa umjetnika u korist kontinuiranog istraživanja prostora i interakcije između ljudi i njihovog neposrednog okruženja. Prvo što slijedi je kratak prilog sa spomenute izložbe Borrow Rob, koju kratko predstavlja njen autor, umjetnik, arhitekt i kustos Peter Macapia. Nakon toga gledamo i sam razgovor s Vitom Acconcijem. Idemo redom.
The exhibition explores a number of relationships between the currency and economy, and the space and the city. And it was about trying to find ways of bringing the city from outside the museum into the inside, and then at the same time bring the experience of the museum as a social space in close relationship to the city. So the installation in the first floor in the Barrel Gallery is about an audience kind of interacting with itself, and at the same time seeing itself in the context of the city, to bring the mirror to show through the doors the cathedral and the street in the background. At the same time, relate that to questions that artists have about the city and public space and the politics of space. So we did all these videos, artists from Israel, Tunisia, Paris, Colombia, to introduce questions that they raise about their experience of space in the city. And then at the same time to ask how are these spaces maybe related to problems of economics. So we did a competition for currency from projects all over the world, including Croatia and Zagreb, where we asked entrants to do something that had to do with conflicts of space. So that was the main idea, to make the museum a kind of financial institution, to make it a public space, and then to provide some kind of a reflection about how we relate to the space of the city. He's an artist moving into design and architecture, and I'm an architect moving back into art, and somehow we cross paths. And his interest in design and architecture has to do with space and on some level time. And my interest in art is to find ways to artistically bring the political questions you can raise in art back into architecture. So he's extremely important to me just as a precedent, as somebody who's produced amazing pieces that explore very simple but also complicated situations. So to talk to him about anything is, of course, like it's an extraordinary kind of thing. But he's a super generous and open person, but very precise and very demanding in terms of what's interesting to him. Not as Vito, but as somebody who thinks about space. I mean, his first pieces were about poetry, words on a page. And in this sense, it's still very 19th century. It's like the work of Mallarmé. But as it became more and more interesting to him, he said, why am I working in a book or on a page? Why don't I work with my body? Why don't I work with space? And now he's asking, why don't I work with architecture and on a larger scale? And I think all of these things are in a sense consistent, but he's used different media to drive this question of what is space and what is our relationship to space. And that's always like a great conversation for us.
Most people connect your name with what you did in the late 60s and 70s.
Which is very unfortunate for me.
With writing and then conceptual art, performance art, body art, installations. Yeah. And to some it may be a surprise that for the last 20 or 25 years you're mostly dealing with architecture and design.
Yeah.
And this may seem like a kind of a radical shift, but it's not really.
I mean, there can be a lot of drifts. I never went to school for anything except writing. I never took art courses. I never took architecture courses. I thought I was a writer. I thought I was a fiction writer. I went to the University of Iowa, which was probably the first, well, not just probably, the first school in the United States that had a writer's workshop. When I came back to New York after doing fiction in Iowa, it was a two-year program. I came back to New York and started to think that maybe I can't do fiction in New York. Maybe New York is too fast for fiction. So I started doing a different kind of writing than I had done in Iowa, and I wanted to do the kind of poem that people would need to have no extra information in order to understand the poem. I wanted things to be, I don't know if the word is as literal as possible, but let me give you an example. A poem, for example, that begins with a period, and then the next line is I don't remember the exact words, but the next line is there I have made my point. So in other words, once I put the period, now I can build the poem on the period. Yeah. So I wanted things to be available to people. The way I thought of a page is you start at the left margin, you go to the right margin, then you turn the page. So I mean, for me, I wanted no unknown information. I thought of for example, another example was a poem in which each line has 3 brackets. One of those brackets is filled with words. It could be the first, the second, the third, and I have no idea if any reader did this, but the reader would give just as much attention to the blank bracket as to the filled bracket. So I wanted everything to be as literal as possible. And I was writing I was writing poems, particularly from, say, 1967 to 1969. One of the last poems I wrote was taking something from a book on reading speed, how to improve reading speed. And the title I gave to it was "The Time Taken for Me to Walk from Such and Such a Street to Such and Such a Street." I mean, the streets were numbered. When I wrote that, I thought, I think this is telling me that maybe I shouldn't be writing anymore. If I'm doing a piece of writing that's if I'm doing a piece of writing that's referring to actual streets in New York, I thought maybe I should start doing stuff in the streets. So stuff became actions, activities. I always hated the word performance because performance to me was a theater word, though everybody used that word to describe this kind of stuff. So I thought I want to do things. I don't know if at that time I called them actions. I called them activities. But I think other people were starting to do something like that too. It was an interesting time for me because I started to see Somebody in Los Angeles is doing this, somebody in San Francisco, somebody in Amsterdam. So I think when you notice things like that, something seems to be in the air. So from doing activities in real space, the activities started to be, since I was using my own person, I thought I took a clue from grammar. I wanted at first to divide myself into I and me. I do something to me. So I am the initiator of the action, and my body, the rest of me, takes the action. So probably I still had writing in mind, even though now it wasn't writing anymore. I wanted very much to almost attack my body. Can I do something that my body has to? Can I, or the initiator, can I as the initiator treat my body as something to almost attack? After a while, and I always had this knack, I think, of reaching a point where I started to think, I don't think I can do this anymore. And the sign was always that I'm repeating something, and I never wanted to repeat. One of the signs that I was repeating was that after a while, in 1972, 72, 73, I was doing probably more projects in Europe than in the United States, and I started to realize that there was a reason for this, and it wasn't just I who was doing pieces in Europe. It was a number of people doing this kind of work in the United States. Chris Burden, Dennis Oppenheim, whatever. Though I started to realize very quickly that there was a reason for this. If a gallery was showing an art doer who might be doing sculpture, might be doing paintings, they would have to pay for the transportation of sculpture, of paintings. If a person was doing the work of an art doer who was only going to use himself or herself, it was much cheaper. All they had to pay was an economy ticket from New York to Europe. So that's how installations started for me. One of the worst things about art is the terms that are used in art. Installation is one of the vaguest terms in the world.
It could be almost anything.
Anything can be installed. A rug can be installed. Curtains could be installed. So I started to really dislike art. I disliked it because of that. I disliked it because as soon as a gallery is involved, the notion of money is involved. And the first gallery I showed with Ileana Sonnabend in New York was I think very involved in the work she showed, but at the same time she was a gallery dealer, and there was this urge to do something that could be sold. I really disliked the idea of selling. Yes, of course, I, like any other person, probably needs to make some kind of money in order to survive. But especially the New York gallery scene in New York. The gallery scene in New York was a certain neighborhood. You know, it used to be Madison Avenue and 57th Street. Then galleries moved, or galleries didn't move. Gallery dealers moved galleries to where more art doers lived in Soho than lived on Madison Avenue or 57th Street. But by that time, I was starting to think, but installations for me led to architecture or something like architecture. And one of the reasons I wanted to do architecture was that I hated the fact that installations in museums, installations in galleries usually couldn't be touched. They were just things to look at. I really hated the idea of visitors to a gallery just looking. I wanted visitors to the gallery to be inside an installation, to be able, you know, if there were seats, they should be able to sit in a seat. If there were seats and tables, seats in front of tables or under tables. I wanted things to be part of the real world, even though I don't think galleries are part of the real world.
You wanted to detach the protective aura of the art object in a way.
Yeah.
So basically your kind of detachment of the world, art world, or divorce from the art world isn't necessarily you ceasing to become an artist, but finding a medium where you can connect with people, connect with the everyday, connect with your environment in a more successful way.
But I wanted not to be an artist. Mm-hmm. You know, I wanted not to be an artist because I hated the terms art and artist, because unlike most other categories in the world, if you say something is furniture, if you say something is biology, this only defines the field and separates this field from other fields. The word art is a troublesome word because very often when people see someone they find attractive or something they find attractive, they say, oh, it's a work of art. So art seems to pre-praise something. And I thought, that's unfair. You know, it's only a category. You know, once you use the word art, it probably gives more credit to that category. Whereas, you know, but also I wanted things to be used, and you know, I knew people used architecture. Yeah, I knew people used furniture.
Mm. Yes, but in a sense, many of the works you did in the 70s and 80s actually had something to do with the architecture, had something to do with public and private space, and the viewer or the user in a way. Even Seedbed, which is the most known example, had a ramp, and you were part of the architecture in a way.
Well, I wanted to be part of the architecture, and I think that's a pretty fair way of saying it. I wanted that particularly in that project because I hated the idea if I was doing something and there's an audience around and I know who that audience is. So I wanted to kind of, I wanted to do something that, yes, persons would know I was there, but they wouldn't necessarily see me. And I think it was more important that I really wouldn't see them, because if I saw them, probably, I don't know, some percentage of these people would be people I knew, and I would be pretending that I didn't know them. So I wanted to be, also I wanted to be under. That was kind of important for me. I wanted a gallery as a place where people go. Now, if I was going to do something in relation to these people, I thought it would be better if I was in this position almost of being inferior to the people who came there. I wanted to be something like the floor, you know. I wanted to be something like the undercurrent.
To what extent was your work at certain phases influenced by music and generational attitudes?
Very, very, very much, actually. I mean, when I was doing Seedbed, I mean, most of the music of the late '60s was not really there anymore. But I was very involved with the kind of prototype music of the late '60s was a single voice, a very long song, and most of the singers, most of their songs, or I don't know if I can say most of their songs, but you know, the prototype song used to be a 2.5, 3-minute songs. The late '60s started to be 7-minute songs, 9-minute songs. And I remember being very struck by a Van Morrison song called Ballerina, where, and I think it was an approximately 7-minute song. And somewhere around the 5th minute, Van Morrison says, "Well, it's getting late now." And the listener says, "Yes, you know, this is twice the length of what used to be a normal song." And it was a song in which the basic lyrics were probably addressed to this woman who he treats as a ballerina, and he's kind of telling her what, and the I of the song, the Van Morrison, which, you know, I don't know if he thought of himself as Van Morrison, but not only would he say things like "it's getting late," but he would start to direct her, like "step right up, do such and such a step, just like a ballerina." So, and I found that to be a real prototype of the '60s, of the late '60s, because it's the he who's telling the she or her what to do. And I started to realize this is an amazingly sexist decade. You know?
Let's go to design and architecture. How many people work in your studio, and how does the development of a new project by the VITO ACCONCI studio?
I mean, the reason I formed the studio was that when I started to be more convinced that I wanted to do architecture, which to me was a kind of art of the everyday world, whereas I don't think art is necessarily of the everyday world. I started to think, I don't want a project to come from me, and I don't want me to give orders to people working with me. I mean, one reason why I had to work with people, because I really couldn't do anything with my hands. You know, I couldn't build, but you know, I could think. I mean, everybody can think, but I started to think, I don't want everything to come from me. I want, and we never had. Well, I was going to say we never had more than 4 designers at the studio. All the people who were designers at the studio went to architecture school, whereas I hadn't. But it wasn't so much. I mean, yes, of course I wanted people who possibly knew more about architecture than I did. I mean, I know how architecture can function, but I don't know architecture well enough that I can build something. I wanted a project to come from a discussion between, say, the 4 designers and me. But I wanted that discussion to be, and I didn't necessarily want to separate me from the 4 designers, though, it was my studio, so I paid them. They didn't pay me. But I wanted a project to come from a kind of, not just a discussion, but an argument, so that I wanted more than one idea to lead to a project, and I think that became very effective for a while, because it had more than one goal. There's been a kind of a problem recently, though, because we. I mean, since the 70s and until relatively recently, we were asked to do a number of projects. Strangely, I didn't realize till I got here that somebody said, did you know that your Graz project is about an hour away? I had no idea. Yeah.
How many of your projects actually do get built?
A small percentage.
Small percentage. So it's more
a small percentage.
More like theoretical, more imaginative, yes. more conceptual.
I'm much more involved with the idea of architecture, but I would love at least some things to get involved, to get built, because if they don't get built, then I think if we're making a model of something, you probably make a model so that persons are led to think the way the makers of the project think, and I would rather people to be kind of on their own. I would rather that. I don't want people. I don't want, and when I say people, visitors, visitors to a project. I would rather that they don't think about this project the way I do, the way Acconci Studio does. I want them to think what they want. I want them to because they might have maybe even a better idea than we do.
Does your reputation as a visual artist sometimes get in the way of your reputation as an architect and designer?
It did. I don't know if it does. If it still does now. I mean, I have a very simple-minded distinction between architecture and art, though this doesn't always apply. If you can be within a project, if you can be using the project, if there's something hinged and you use the hinge to put down a seat, then it's probably architecture. If you have to sort of walk around it, if there's a do not touch sign, then it's probably art. But that's my definition.
Thank you, Vito, for your time.
Thank you.
To je bilo sve u večerašnjoj Trikulturi. Mi se vidimo ponovo za 2 tjedna. Laku noć.